Well, hey, my name is Laine. I have the honor and privilege to serve as your family pastor. Hey, when I was a little boy, I remember sitting out on the back porch with my grandpa. We called him Gump. He was the OG Gump, way before Forrest. And he was my hero. And I loved hanging out with him, learning from him. He could do anything. He could fix anything. I can close my eyes and still smell that oily, musty shop out in the garage. He had his cutting torch and welder, and he even had his own air compressor that he built out of an old butane tank and a compressor he harvested off of an old freezer. If he needed a tool that he didn't have and there wasn't such a tool, he'd just invent one and make it. He wasn't afraid to take risks, and he did some pretty cool things in his life. When my mom was a little girl out on the farm, they had one car, and it broke down. They didn't have the money to get it fixed, and he didn't know anything about automobiles. But he said, how hard could it be? So he pulled the motor and worked on that car. It took him 2 or 3 weeks, and by the time that was done, he buttoned it back up and had multiple parts left over. And that car ran better than it did when it was brand new. He was just that kind of guy. And I loved hearing his adventures and the things that he did. And one that I remember the most, and I don't know why, maybe it was because it just showed his love for my grandmother. And my grandpa, when he was a young man, he was a ball turret gunner on the belly of a B-17 bomber. He was stationed out in Fort McClellan in Alabama, and he had just proposed to what would be my grandmother, but they were 1,000 miles away, and he was missing her. And he's like, I got to get home to see my girl. And his buddies were like, well, it's Saturday, and you got roll call on Monday. He went for it. And so he shared with me this adventure of catching a flight on a military plane from Alabama, sat in the jump seat all the way to DFW. Then he had to hitchhike all the way to this little bitty town in the panhandle of Texas. Finally gets there. Success. He and my grandmother spent 2 glorious hours together before he realized, I got to get back, or I'm going to be AWOL. Well, he shares of the adventures of going all the way back, shows up 30 minutes prior to roll call. He did it. And I can still see, I guarantee he had that same little sheepish little grin of, I pulled it off. I did it. Guys, I hope I hope to someday be able to sit on the back porch with my grandkids and share the memories whenever I played it safe, took no risks, chose the comfortable and familiar, did nothing really significant in my life. Said no one ever. But if I'm being honest with you guys today, the truth is there are many times in my life where I did play it safe. I ignored the nudgings of the Holy Spirit, hid from opportunities that were placed in front of me, just really avoiding my purpose. And guys, however, as I started to get a little bit older, my hair started to thin just a tad. Just a tad. It'll turn a little gray. It made me really start to wonder, when I reached the end of my life, would I have done anything that had an eternal impact on this world? And I would say that whether any of us in here are adventurous or not, there's something inside of all of us that wants to leave our mark, to do something bigger than ourselves, to give back. But we don't do it. We want to, but we don't. Why is that? It's such an important question to ask, and so today we're going to ask it. We're kicking off a 2-week series entitled Said No One Ever. And in this series, we'll address both barriers and some bridges that we all face to commit as we take new ground and follow Jesus into this high-risk, heart-pounding, world-changing, abundant life that he has for us. Guys, faith is an adventure that requires action. Today, we're going to dig into the barriers that hold us back from taking these big steps of faith. And then next week, Chris is going to bring us home with some bridges or some action steps to help move us forward. But if we can't first identify and acknowledge the barriers that we have, guys, we're going to be paralyzed to make the bridges that break through the barriers. So have you ever faced an opportunity that required big faith? What'd you do with it? I'm not saying it has to be something like joining full-time ministry and being a missionary in the outback somewhere. What about sharing your faith with someone? Inviting your neighbor or maybe your nephew to man camp. Maybe it is going on a mission trip. For some of you guys, God's called you to adopt a young child. Start a business to help people. Run for office. May have a future president here. Or maybe even run for the local school board. What's your step? What are the barriers that are holding you back? You know, I've got a bunch of buddies, a handful of buddies I used to dream with. And I dream with different buddies over different things. And man, I love doing that. I kind of have this entrepreneurial mind, but I lack the entrepreneurial hands and feet. I can't even say it yet. That's how bad it is. And I had a buddy call me out on it one time. He says, you know, Laine, you talk a big game. We come in here, we dream, but you don't really ever do anything with it. It's like you're staring down the barrel of a rifle. Ready? Aim. 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 You never do seem to get to the fire part. Just once, I would love for you to raise that rifle and go, ready, fire, aim. And he was right. I'd get stuck in that aim cycle. Maybe you do too. It ends up becoming a barrier that keeps us from moving forward. So what's keeping us in this aiming cycle? What are the barriers that are holding us back from following God's promptings in our lives? Well, let's talk about a few of them. The first one here, past failure. You know, when we fail, when we really fail, especially when we fail over and over and over and over again, it's really hard to get back up on that horse, isn't it? All of my fellow weight challenge buddies out here get this. You remember when we decided we were going to get healthy, get in shape, eat right, exercise. And we did great for the first few weeks, didn't we? Maybe even months. Somehow we fall off. Makes it so much harder to get back up on that horse again after that failure, doesn't it? Especially after the first, second, third. For some of us, 30th time. Well, I want to tell you, I got back up on the horse again. I decided I was going to see if I could get healthy again for the umpteenth, jillionth time. So I'm doing the keto thing. I know some of you guys like that, some of you don't. But, yeah, don't get to eat sugar anymore. No bread, no tortillas. That's tough for a Texan. No cinnamon rolls. I don't even get Bill's donut holes out here on Sunday morning anymore. It's tough. But it's starting to pay off. Starting to pay off. I know y'all probably can't see it here. You can probably see it in my face. There's no joy. No excitement. And our past failure can bring a lot of shame. And did you know that the first fruit of sin is shame? Have you ever thought about it? I mean, let's go back to the very beginning. Adam and Eve, they're in the Garden of Eden. They take a bite of the fruit. What happens immediately? They're embarrassed. They hid. All of a sudden, we become insecure and we feel rejected, and it really starts to make us question our worthiness of being used. Look at Peter, for example. Remember, Jesus said that before the rooster crows, you will have denied me 3 times. No way, can't happen. I'm Peter. Jesus says, okay. Can you imagine the shame he felt? But don't worry, Peter's not alone. Abraham was a liar. Noah an alcoholic. Job doubted God. Samson was promiscuous. Paul a murderer. David an adulterer and a murderer. And then Moses rounds out the murder trio, but he also had anxiety. Elijah was suicidal. Rahab a prostitute. The disciples were often weak and jealous of each other. And these are the heroes. So what's so bad that you've done that God can't use you? You see, these heroes overcame their barriers. Peter may have been embarrassed to say that he knew Jesus, but you know what? He went on to become the rock in which Jesus built his church. Abraham was the father of nations. Noah was faithful to build the ark. Job was more prosperous after his trial than he was before. Samson was a warrior for Christ. Paul was an apostle that preached the gospel all over Europe and the Middle East. By the way, he also happened to write most of the New Testament that we read today. David was a man after God's own heart. Moses led the Israelites out of captivity into the promised land. Elijah raised people from the dead. Rahab protected the spies that Joshua sent in to Jericho when they came to take over the promised land. Finally, we got the disciples. They established the church, grew it. Worthy? Really? We were never worthy. It's not on the resume for God to use you. He uses all people with all pasts. I think sometimes we question our worthiness because we want the credit. Can I let you on a little secret? We don't get to keep the credit anyway. God does. God gets the credit. He gets the glory. We can't handle the glory. It was never meant for us. It was only ever meant for him. So in this ready, aim, fire analogy, is past failures your barrier? Is shame your aim? It's a good question for us to ask. Let's move on to this next one here. Busyness. We're all busy, right? We're all busy. We have too much clutter. Some of us have a hard time saying no, and we end up becoming more busy. I get to speak to a lot of people out here in the foyer before and after church. And in fact, I talked to a young man that's in our parenting class on Wednesday night, and I asked him the same question I ask a lot of people. It's like, hey, buddy, how you doing? How's your family doing? What's going on? Guess what he told me? Man, I'm busy. We're busy. And if we're not busy, we're tired. We're probably tired because we're busy. Busy, busy, busy. And I want to tell you that most of the things we're busy doing, they're probably good things. I'm not trying to throw rocks at it. But have we left any margin for God, or are we just so busy doing the things that are temporal that there's simply no time left to do anything that's eternal. You see, there's a cost to following Jesus, and time is one of them. In Luke 9, there's a story of Jesus. He's walking along this road. He has multiple encounters with men. We're going to pick up the story with one of them here. He says to the man, "Follow me." But he replied, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and proclaim the kingdom of God." And I'm sure that most of you guys are looking at that and says, "Jesus, that sounds a bit harsh." Really? The guy can't go bury his dad? Well, the story doesn't give us a lot of details here. We don't really know what's going on. We really don't even know if this guy's father is dead yet. We don't know if it's a firstborn who needs to go home, make sure that his inheritance is taken care of. We don't know, but Jesus knew his heart. And he knew at the end of the day it was just an excuse of, "But first, let me go do this." He continues on, has another conversation. Still another said, "I will follow you, Lord, but first let me go back and say goodbye to my family." And Jesus replied, "No one who puts hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the service in the kingdom of God." Again, sounds a bit harsh. But if we're going to follow Jesus, he's got to be first. And that means first over your family. And I'd be willing to bet that most of us in this room have a hard time with that one. Is he first? Do we always have something that we've got to go do first? But this, I got to go do that. You know what we call those people where I come from? We call them blisters. They show up when all the work's done. There's always an excuse. There's always a but. You know, and I'm really struggling with some past pain. And I heard about this great ministry y'all had. It's called Regeneration or something like that. Man, I'd really love to do that, but I got pickleball on Monday night. I'd love to help with student ministry. Man, it sounds like that would be a really great thing, but I'm going to miss the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. Maybe for you, God's calling you to a ministry. Maybe it's a father-son ministry. Maybe it's a single mother's ministry. Whatever it is. That sounds tempting. Man, I'd really love to do something like that, but my kids, they got games on the weekend. It would take weekends to do this, and you know, I've got them signed up for 30 different activities year-round. We're busy every weekend with our kids' games. There's always a but. But. Church, it's time to get off our butts. It's time to step out in faith. Let's move on to this next one here. It's too hard. When it's too hard, we really just don't even know where to start. Everything seems overwhelming. The task seems insurmountable. I kind of look at it like parenting. And we just talk about how hard parenting is, right? It's just so hard. But can I tell you that 95% of my failure as a father had nothing to do with whether or not I knew the right thing to do. I mean, my bride and I have been teaching parenting classes for 20 plus years. We knew the right thing to do. Most of my mistakes were born out of laziness because it took too much effort to do the right thing. And I'm wondering if you're honest with yourself, it'd be the same thing. But church, you can't birth anything without first going through labor. Maybe you're out there saying, I haven't really had those opportunities. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, maybe it's time to open our eyes and get in the game. Because the opportunity that you're looking for is probably in the work that you're avoiding. Now, let's just be honest. We all like comfortable. But being content in our comfort leads to complacency, can lead to selfishness, even greed. Remember the young man in Luke 18 comes to Jesus and said, Jesus, what will it take for me to get to heaven? Jesus tells him, follow the commandments. He goes, I've done that. Didn't take Jesus long to kind of figure out where this guy was going. And he kind of cuts to the chase and gets to the meat of the matter. And he just tells him, all right then, go sell everything you own and give it to the poor. Then come and follow me. And that man walked away sad because he was very wealthy. It's too hard. It's too hard. Church, if we're going to overcome this barrier of things being too hard, we need to channel some of that grit from our grandparents, our great-grandparents, from my Gump. Hard is good. It's good for us. And you know what? It's okay to exercise the struggle muscle every now and then. And it has nothing to do with what you're capable of. It's what you're willing to do. God will make you capable. The question is, are you willing to pull the trigger? Let's move on to this last one here, control. I'll tell you a story when our little boys were in elementary school. My bride and I had this epiphany. We had this idea, and we made the decision that whenever our kids got into middle school, we weren't going to move anymore. Just thought that would be a good thing. We see kids that would move in and out and figured it would be really difficult for high schoolers or middle schoolers to keep switching schools. And I know that probably happens a lot in a military town like this. But we just thought that was best for our kids. So our kids finally got into middle school, and guess what happens? Found myself looking for a job. Committed the number one cardinal sin my dad told me to never do. He said, never quit a job without first having another one. And I was struggling because we lived in a small town. There wasn't a whole lot to do there. And I remember lamenting one day during my quiet time. I was whining to God. That's what that means. I was whining. And just, God, I guess I'm going to have to commute to DFW every day, hour there, hour back. I guess that's what's going to be my life now. Because, we said we weren't going to move after our kids got into middle school. So I feel like I'm having this conversation with God. There wasn't anything audible or anything, but I felt that he impressed on me. He said, so, hey, Laine, this whole idea about you not, what was it again? Move? You're not going to move once your kids get in middle school? Yeah. Whose idea was that? I'm like, well, that was my idea. That's a pretty good idea. And then silence. I'm just bobbing and weaving here. I'm waiting for the next comeback. And then finally he says this. He says, Laine, did you ever consult me in that? And I knew immediately that I'd stopped trusting God. I was trying to take control of my life and my family's life. And I committed to him right then and there. I repented. I said, God, you move me wherever you want. If you move me to Timbuktu, I'll go. I just might need some ID if you do that one. That's all he needed. Less than a week later, I get a call from the hospital. Out of the blue. Offered me a job. Making good money. I stayed there for 12 years before coming here. I can't promise you that something like that's going to happen to you, but in my situation, I really believe God was just saying, I just want to know who's driving the bus. I'll give you the desires of your heart. Who's driving the bus? So we look at all of these barriers. We have past failure, busyness, too hard, control. But you know what? Ultimately, they all come to one commonality, one root cause, and that's fear. Fear is deadly. Keeps us on the sidelines, keeps us on the bench, guys. We got to get in the game and let faith conquer our fear. There may be a dozen more barriers. These are just the ones that I've struggled with. In fact, I've recently seen all of these barriers come to the forefront of my life just 5 years ago. You see, before moving here, Laura and I lived in Texas our entire life, born and raised our kids there. We did ministry there. It's everything that we've known. And then I get a call from this guy named Chris. He just happens to be the lead pastor at Fearless Church. Chris was one of those buddies I used to hang out with. He was one of my dreamer buddies. Except with him, we kind of dreamed about more eternal things. And man, we used to have fun. Talking what ministry would look like if we did ministry someday together. But I never really did anything with it. And then, of course, one day he comes to me and says, "Hey, Laine, I really think God's calling me to this terrible place in Ohio." I'm like, "All right, dude, give me a holler when you move back to Texas. Maybe we can do some ministry together someday." And I honestly thought that was the end of it. Be careful what you wish for. Because 4 years later, he come a-calling. And he said, "Hey, Laine, we've got an opportunity here. We think you'd be a good fit. I'd love for you to come be the family pastor. Help us build this family ministry. I think it's going to be really unique. It's not something that we're seeing in any of the churches out here. It's really putting mom and dad back in that position of being that primary faith trainer. And I think you'd be a good addition to our team." And while that sounded exciting, more than that was this guy over here. I couldn't even begin to think about how I would consider this without dealing with all of my fears. So that's what Laura and I did. We sat down and just said, okay, we're freaked out over this, but we don't know why. What's holding us back from considering this? So we went right back through them. It's like past failure. I was ashamed of some past sin. I didn't feel worthy. I didn't graduate from some esteemed seminary. I had a lot of past failure. We were busy. Didn't have a degree in seminary, but Laura and I had just gone back and got our master's. My late 40s. Got my MBA, sat down with the vice president of our company and mapped out my future. I knew where I was going, and I was busy attaining it. It was hard to stop when we were so busy chasing that dream. Then it was just too hard. It's probably one of the more difficult ones. We've never lived away from family. We didn't know how that was going to look. Didn't know how often we were going to get to see them. It's an 18-hour drive. That means we're flying. Can we even afford that? It was just too hard. And then on top of that, Chris wants me to build some kind of family ministry. And I'm like, it just seems too hard. It just seems too hard. And then finally control. I guess I didn't learn my lesson when my kids were in middle school, because I couldn't see my future anymore. I had it mapped out. I knew where I was going. And now I didn't have control again. And let's be honest, these were my prime earning years for retirement. I don't know what my financial security is going to be like. I had no control. Guys, we prayed about it for weeks, and we spent a lot of time identifying those barriers. It ultimately came down to two factors. Was God truly calling us? Was he calling us to Ohio, or is this just some act of hubris? Because if not, we don't need to go. But we need to hear from God. Have you ever been put in that situation where he's like, I got to hear from God. How do I hear from him? Well, if you've been here any length at all, you've probably heard us talk about God speaks to us in 3 different ways: his word, his spirit, and through his people. Church, do not make this decision in isolation. Seek God and wise counsel. Can I give you a pro tip? This is a good one. Y'all lean in for this one. I'm not much of a journaler, and I know I just lost all of the men in the room. But hang with me for a second. If you feel like God's calling you, write down that process. Write down your prayers, what you think he's saying to you, what wise counsel you're getting. Write it down. Because I'm going to tell you, if you do say yes and you take that step, the enemy's coming. Just like the snake in the Garden of Eden. Did he really say that? Are you sure it was God that called you? No, right here, I was going to go right. He said turn left, and yeah, I've got it. Because when the times get tough, and they will, you're going to want to turn back to look at this and say, did he really call me? Is he calling you? Second question was, am I willing to trust him? Am I willing to trust that he's going to handle our fears? Because we should be doing this all the time. Guys, if we can't trust him in the mundane, we'll never trust him in the miraculous. So if you're wondering if I can relate with your struggle, I've been there. The journey is real. And as I look back at my journey of faith overcoming fear, it reminds me of a poem from my grandmother as she was nearing the end of her life. It's one of my favorite poems. Now, this grandmother was married to Gump. So they were Vonnie and Gump, greatest people that ever lived. Awesome. But one of her favorite poems I'd like to share with you as if we were sitting out on the back porch with my Vonnie and Gump. So if y'all would oblige me, I'd like to share this with you. The poem is called The Dash by Linda Ellis. And it goes like this. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He spoke of the dates on the tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of birth and spoke of the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between the years. For the dash represents all of the time that you spent here on earth, and now only those who loved them know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters most of all is how we live and love and how we spend our dash. So think about this long and hard. Are there things you like to change? For you never know how much time is left that can be rearranged. If we could just slow down enough and consider what's true and real, and always try to understand the way other people feel. Be less quick to anger and show appreciation more, and to love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. If we treat each other with respect and more often wear a smile, remembering this special dash may only last a little while. So when your eulogy is being read with your life's actions to rehash, would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? Where are you in that poem? Are you pursuing God's purpose for you in your life? Do you feel the tug from the Holy Spirit? Step out of your comfort zone and do something courageous. Can I encourage you to take that step? What legacy are you going to leave behind that's bigger than you? Are all of your accomplishments temporal and dependent on you and you alone? Or do they have an eternal impact that require you to lean on the direction and the encouragement of Jesus? You see, I believe that our successes are measured when we're gone, not while we inhabit these temporal bodies. Where are you going? Who are you taking with you? Who's going to carry your torch when you're gone? Don't let your accomplishments die with you. For you never know. You never know when you're going to get that phone call. Or when God whispers in your ear to do something great. Did you know that he's got a purpose for all of us? A heart-pounding, thrilling, eternal purpose. What's yours? And what are the barriers that are keeping you from doing it? Are you staring down that barrel of opportunity? Stuck in the aim cycle? If you are, maybe it's time to ready, fire, aim. Let's pray.